victory in Jesus. So this is a real challenge for John MacArthur. I don't know what to title it. I'd like to get some clickbait title because I'd really like to wake some people up with this one. I'm going to start off with going over the meaning of Torah again, which means 4x4. The original legend was that God built a 4x4 house. See, whatever you want to say, cubits, feet, whatever. Made it with a window. And those who feared God and needed law, they would go in there to keep comfortable. Because they were scared of him, see? And they were scared because outside there was, the devil, who is the prince of the power of the air, like all the churches always preach. And so, that window, when those people went inside and they got comfortable, some of them looked outside and missed loving God and knowing him. So they went outside. And as John MacArthur was preaching on Peter, that's what he did too when he spoke in tongues, which John MacArthur preaches again. Yeah, that one. Oh no, I bragged about it. No, I'm bragging because I know God, because see, let he who has wisdom not boast of his wisdom, which I think John MacArthur does with his master's theology, which is the wisdom of men that make doctrines of men that make sons of hell. And the wisdom of men is foolishness to God, and the foolishness to men is wisdom to God. So, back to what I was saying about that Torah, you see. Peter and all them went outside to love God and know him and tell others how to, like the king did when he came and was killed, you see. But that vineyard parable that John MacArthur was preaching about was quite interesting, as he made it such a racial thing and related it to the fig tree. Well, I could only sit through half of it, since it is so slow it tries to put me to sleep, because I cannot handle listening to doctrines of men for an hour to make my head into mashed potatoes. So I only sat through half of it, but during that time I did notice that he pointed at the fig tree and said that was Israel. And that may be quite true, but there is another meaning that could fit to you, Mr. MacArthur, my fine sir, because you recently bragged about preaching at Legionnaire Ministries, where that R.C. Sproul came from, and he preaches about the holiness of God and agrees with many things like you. But he preached that Jesus' blood, well, he was only shedding enough for a few chosen of us, not for the world, you see, because that would be a waste of his blood. Come on, man. He's God, remember? And he also preached that, well, that was part of that tulip theme. The ones that are predestined to burn in hell forever. That's just their, plan. So, anyway, besides that, Mr. R.C. Sproul also mentioned that other verse, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the Pharisees, you have no part in the kingdom. He said that was the scariest verse in the Bible to him. So tell me, Mr. MacArthur, you who preach about that tree, the fig tree, being Israel, well, if your fruit isn't so sweet and ready for a harvest, then how's that all going to go for you? Because you're very quick to say now that you are the chosen ones, when just not that long ago you were talking about impending war. And yet not that long ago, you supported Trump, and I thought pastors aren't supposed to get political, and yet you came out and said, well, he's pro-life, and I'm pro-life, so I support Trump. We, at Grace to You, we are with Trump, as he made the gold coins with the vax and the sword on the back to cut our heads off and take over as a race. And are you into that ghost of Christ that rose from the dead thing, and not a man in heaven coming back as king? And that's why you talk about a kingdom a lot, and kind of talk about that king being in us instead of that kingdom being in us, like those greatest 2 commandments he told us to follow. Yet you never talk of that either. Isn't that funny how these themes go away from you? Because that other thing that John the Essene who was pretty much homeless before he preached, then he came and said the axe is at the root of the tree, bear fruit worthy of repentance. And you talk about the Pharisees and how Isaiah quoted them, that they were already blind, they could not see, their hearts had grown hard. Well, those Pharisees loved money and God, supposedly, but the king said, you can't love money and God, you see. And Acts 2 had a church that, well, you seem to act like you are now, but yet they never had an offering. They just gave it all. And nobody had money. And so if Peter was pretty much homeless before he started preaching, and Paul was a tent maker and wasn't overflowing with money, then how are you with your sweet fruit showing us how you are the remnant? Because I don't see it much. Maybe you're anti-Catholic and definitely love to point at Israel and say that they are chosen, but they screwed up, so they're not chosen, but they are chosen. I can't really tell which way you're going, but if it's true, as the real story has it, that the original African slave ship that picked up Africans owned by the Rothschilds picked up the Kush tribe from Negro land, Africa, and those were the first slaves that came to America. And then there's this other thing about some Ashkenazi tribe that was like from Germany, but just kind of got like disappeared somehow. And now many claim they are it, but nobody really knows where they went, or if Eisenhower like exterminated them at the end of World War II after Hitler died and he kept fighting the Germans for years in the Hellstorm War we never heard anything about. So if all these things like fit so good with you, Mr. Grace to You, and how you are the chosen few, please do tell about your great doctrines of men that make sons of hell, and how they fit in with the king's idea of loving God right and your neighbor as yourself as the 2 greatest commandments for the greatest reset. Or are you part of that Depop plan that worked 100 years ago from pneumonia, when they told everybody, the soldiers, good, they're all contagious, you better mask up? So now we're in Egypt Plague Part 2 100 years later. And it's led by the church. And of course, you are so politically correct with your Trump support, but now you say that Trump was what? That he was too into pride? And isn't that what the Pharisees had when they had the self-righteousness that we have to exceed? And what was that about prostitutes and tax collectors will make it before you? Or let the children come unto me, for theirs is the kingdom? Maybe many kids that believe in Santa Claus will be better off to fit with the king and his kingdom than you, my fine sir, because your Grace to You doctrines look a little shaky, especially when you trust a Casper ghost and Passover's coming. Is it going to be Happy Halloween for you? Are you still making like a mummy in your pyramid? Or are you doing amazing homeless camping as the dollar turns to peso as your buddy Trump warp sped our dollar away? Well, bankruptcy was his specialty for billions before he acted as an apprentice prez. But you loved him, and you're not an apprentice at all, are you, fine sir, with your masters? Masterful you are with those words. How you slice them up so nicely. But it doesn't seem like truth all the time. It sounds more like modern day Pharisees. And that would make you fit in with that R.C. Sproul idea. Because you are Protestant after all, right? And like that one rabbi just said, the first Protestants were Pharisees. And they protested Jesus, you see. So are you into all those anti-Semite laws and LGBTQ laws that Trump was bringing in with those swords to take over as a race? Fitting with that ghost idea that deity of Christ and Trinity fit in with? Is that what this is all about? But now you're just trying to be the protected side? Or do you have an underground bunker that you trust won't be at the beach show when it all turns to glass? It would be exciting to know what you really do think you are there in Revelation 2. Or are you part of those people that make a way for the king in Micah 2? Because it doesn't seem to me that you are. You seem to be like one of those modern Pharisees, like those ones in Revelation when the king comes and says, you think you are rich, but you are poor. Poor, indeed. Well, I think it's time to get ready. Talk about where you're really at and where you really think that king's going to put you when he comes back, and how he's going to identify you as that true church of a king who never talks about how we all will bow for that king.